You're on Long Final, Ireland's aviation podcast from Squawk 7000.
Hello and welcome to Long Final from Squawk 7000. On this episode, I'm talking with pilot and radio presenter Barry Lang. I started our conversation by asking Barry about the last aircraft he was in command of.
An Airbus A380. It was it was a Bangkok flight. I flew it there and back to Dubai. So, but that was quite a while ago now.
The idea that you flew it there and back suggests that you kind of might have known it was your last one, was it?
No, I didn't. I wish I did. I probably would have made more out of it had I known. It took everybody by surprise. It was a few weeks after that things got pretty serious, and we were all grounded. And that's March of 2020. Flying for Emirates. I'd been there for 13 years. And started on the A330 as a first officer. Got my command on the 330, then the 340, and ended up the last 3 years as a captain on the A380.
What's it like to fly the 380?
The A380 is not like any Airbus I had flown before because it is, I mean, the type rating, they say it's a common rating. It's another Airbus. You jump in and you go. And that doesn't really become apparent until you've actually been flying it for a while. You don't see the differences once you've got, a couple of hundred hours on it. You say, yeah, this is just like an A340. But in fact, the course, the technical course, the simulator, the procedures, the systems on the airplane are totally different. It's got 4 engines, and that's about all it has in common with an A340 that I flew before. But it's a wonderful machine, and I have no doubt it'll be the best airplane I'll ever fly. It was designed for incredible redundancy. They wanted it to get 500 people, 500 miles on 50% of the systems. And it would do that very, very easily. It was a great airplane.
Did it ever surprise you?
No, the airplane never really surprised me. I have to be honest. No, I had no real shocks or surprises, and nothing really happened that I could blame on the airplane, at least, No, it was a great machine. I loved it. And as I say, after a while, you do see that it is very obviously an Airbus. So I've got like 15,000 hours of Airbus time. So there wasn't going to be a lot that was going to surprise me or any very much that I hadn't seen before.
I know you're a CRM instructor as well, and I'm just curious about having so big a crew. That's an extra set of skills for the commander of a 380.
Yeah, it does. And it is something that takes quite a bit of getting used to. When you go to do your crew briefing at the start of every flight, you walk into a room and there's 25, sometimes 28 crew in the room that you've got to talk to. So just doing that is quite an event, especially if, you were flying an A320 before where you had 4 or 5, but you get used to that. And as you say, CRM is a big thing on that airplane. So leadership is really important. Communication is super important. And the crew all know that. They understand how important it is that if there is an issue, if there's something going on that somebody needs to know about, to put it through the chain of command and to communicate properly. It's really important. And they do it very well.
It is interesting, of course, with COVID and, of course, as a result of the pandemic, we're seeing airlines cutting back on the bigger fleets. Do you think the days of the 380 might be numbered, or is there a future for it?
Yeah, I think the 380, the problem that a lot of airlines have for it is that it just does not fit their model. I can see an airline in Europe somewhere where it doesn't quite work because it's too big, it's too expensive. It burns anywhere between 11 and 13 tons of fuel an hour, and that's a huge expense. Unless you are like Emirates, based in Dubai, where you are halfway to everywhere. You are in the middle of the world. So you can go east or west, north or south, and you can fly for 15 hours. There are routes that you can do that airplane fit perfectly into. That's why, going to Australia, it was perfect for that. Going to the west coast of the US, it was perfect for that. And the flights were always full. So when you ask me, is it going to come back? I think if it is, and we don't know yet, and despite what the airlines are saying, especially Emirates are saying, yes, we'll come back, they don't really know. They're keeping their fingers crossed. But if it can come back, it will be for an airline like Emirates, where a good 60, 70% of their routes are ultra long range routes. So it fits their model perfectly. And I hope it does. It would be a terrible shame if it was to just disappear into the distance.
And of course, that resulted in you being back here in Ireland. And we're going to talk about what you're at the moment back in the world of broadcasting. But I want to stay with the flying for a minute, because we talked about your last flight in command. I'm now curious about your first flight. And maybe let's ask the question I ask all pilots. Your very first solo. When was that?
Oh, my goodness. I did my initial flight training with Iona, if you can remember back that far. And I did my first solo. Yeah, I did my first solo on runway 23 in Dublin it must have been 1984 in a Cessna 150, which I think is still flying. It was Echo India Bravo Mike November. Maybe it's a 152, actually. And yeah, it was just a couple of circuits on 2-3, and I was king of the world afterwards. And when people I used to work in recruitment, and you would always ask, there was a question that, I would always ask, what was your most memorable flight? And it always has to be that one, your first solo. Yeah, anybody who said anything else is making it up, Well,
of course, that's the other thing, is that you did it at an international airport, and you were part of the traffic.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen today.
It wouldn't happen today, exactly. No. Do you remember any of the instructors?
Yeah, Jim Duggan. Jim Duggan was my main instructor, and I'm still friends with him today. Incredible.
Your paths have crossed many times, I'm sure. Indeed, he's been on the program with us as well. Yes. Okay, so I suppose we set the scene, and this is where we're going to have a little bit of fun, I suppose. Going back, you were flying in 1984. You're doing your first solo, but you were also very well known, and indeed still well known at the time, because you were on 2FM or Radio 2.
I joined RT Radio 2 in 1980, and I stayed there for 18 years, left in 1998. And during that time, I got interested in flying. Initially, I did a lot of skydiving, and then I ended up working at the weekends. And because I was working weekends, I couldn't go down to Edenderry so much to do my skydiving. And so I said, well, I really want to be in the air. So I took up flying. And look what happened. I ended up, going the usual route. I did it all myself. I didn't go off to America or anything like that. I took the long, slow slog, getting a PPL, a CPL, and then ultimately my air transport license. And I can't remember exactly how long it took me. It took quite a few years. I didn't do it all at one go. And people ask me, how it happened. I just say it was a hobby that got out of control and turned into a job. But I have no regrets about it.
And to be fair, if you were looking for a job at that stage, there were slim pickings.
Very slim pickings. In fact, I had a commercial license for 7 years before I actually got a first job, which was with Trans Aer. So it was in the 80s, early 90s. The market was terrible, probably almost as bad as it is right now. With COVID, there just weren't any jobs around, and it all changed. And I ended up going to Trans Aer in 1998. And it was a dream job, because I got a job flying as a first officer on the A320.
At that point too, though, you had to make a decision to give up what a lot of people would have seen as the big gig, which would be on the radio, national, the Beatbox, etc. Do you remember that conversation when you had to turn to the people in RT and say, "Good luck, lads, I'm off"?
Yeah, I do. I remember it very well. Of course, the first conversation I had to have was with myself, and what was I prepared to do this? And that conversation took about a microsecond, to be honest. I was more. In fact, I had been thinking about it for quite a few years. I knew that broadcasting, and maybe you've broken the mold on this, but at the time, I didn't see broadcasting as something that I could do into my old age. It was not the kind of job that I could consider to be permanent and pensionable. And I knew that and at some stage I was going to have to make a decision on, did I really want to continue taking that risk, or would I look for something a little bit more serious? And I wanted to do something a little bit more academic. I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more. I've been in radio for 18 years at RT, and 2 or 3 years before that on the Pirates. So I was ready for a change. Went in to see my boss once I had finally decided I was going to go. He was a great guy, Bill O'Donovan. He was the head of 2FM at the time. And I sat down and I said to him, look, here's the story. I gave them like 6 months notice or whatever. And I said, I'm going to go and take up a flying career. And he said, I know there's no point in offering you any more money. And he just wished me the best of luck and didn't try to talk me out of it, because he knew it wouldn't work.
And we'll continue our chat in just a moment. My guest on this episode of Long Final is Captain Barry Lang. That point then where you, I suppose, put the uniform on for the first day and you head in to do the job, was there a sense of accomplishment, or was it, as you say, that feeling of, what am I doing here?
No, it was daunting. I went to Trans Aer sent me down to Johannesburg to do the A320 course, and I'd never flown a jet before. The biggest thing I'd flown before the 320 was a Navajo Chieftain, so it was a massive leap from a piston twin into a passenger jet. So the biggest challenge to meet at the beginning was to just get through the course, just survive the course, and then go on to do the line training and then fly the line. But it all went really smoothly. I had no issues. Loved every moment of it, as I did for the rest of my time flying. I don't think I ever went to work without a smile. It was great.
I hope somebody at some point in your life has slagged you about the quality of your PAs. They must be good.
Yeah, well, no, that was the beauty of doing most of your flying in the Middle East. You know, that nobody knew me, nobody cared, so that was okay. You know?
From Trans Aer, where did you go next?
Trans Aer, I stayed at Trans Aer for about 3 years. Loved that job. That was an incredible job. As you know, it was all ACMI, aircrew maintenance insurance, wet leasing around the world. Got to fly based in Paris. I was based in Brussels. Based in Cuba for a few months. Oh. We had some great contracts around the world. Unfortunately, they went bust. And after that, I was looking around along with the rest of the Trans Aer guys for something to do. It just so happened that Gulf Air were looking for contract pilots at the time, and a whole bunch of us ended up down there flying their 320. They had just had their 320 crash. They were looking for some experienced pilots to come in, and we ended up down there. I went on a 6-month contract, and I ended up staying for 7 years. Wow! So that tells you a lot about
quite an Irish community down there as well, I imagine.
Yeah, there is. And there must have been 20 plus Trans Aer pilots that ended up down there as well. So it was. It was fantastic. Lovely place, lovely people. It's quiet. It's not too crazy, and very enjoyable.
If flying became your profession, what became your hobby?
That's a good question. Well, later on, it became, I suppose, photography became my hobby, which I'm still doing now. And that's, I'll have to watch that, because that's starting to go in the same direction that the flying went.
Turning it into a job, is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to avoid all that, but that was probably it. But as you know, anybody who flies, who is a professional pilot, will know if that's your choice, you don't have a lot of time for anything else. It's a round the clock job. You're constantly studying. You're constantly preparing for your simulators. You're constantly keeping up to date with new developments. There's always some kind of an update to familiarize yourself with. So So there wasn't very much time for it.
I was just checking to see were you one of the golfing pilot fraternity.
No.
You
That's
avoided
a
that.
waste of a long walk. Yeah, no, I have avoided that. Yeah.
Tell me a bit about instruction.
I was a CRM instructor at Emirates. I spent about 5 days every month in the classroom. We had a really good CRM human factors department at Emirates. They still do, of course. And I was part of a team that put together the new modules that we would prepare for the recurrent. And I was teaching recurrent, initial, and new joiner Airbus pilots their CRM courses. Loved every moment of it, especially the recurrent, because you would get a class full of very experienced guys, maybe 15 or 20 in the class, and a lot of it is just shooting the breeze and talking about your experiences. What's happened to you in the last 6 months? What have you learned? What can you tell me that I might use on my next flight when something might happen? And that was one of the things about the 380. Depending on the configuration, you could have up to 615 passengers on board, plus your 25 crew. So there was always something going on in the cabin. There was always a sick passenger. There was always an issue with somebody somewhere that you had to deal with. So you got a lot of experience with dealing with that. So the classroom was great. And I love the whole subject of human factors. I think it's everybody thinks being a pilot is about flying the airplane. It's about hands on the yoke or the side stick. And it's about, on a dark and stormy night, landing it into some terrible high elevation airport. Well, that's a given, isn't it? We all know we can do that because we have a piece of paper that says you can fly an airplane. But nobody thinks about what is really the biggest part of the job, which is being the leader, being the communicator, holding it all together, making the big decisions, problem solving. And they happen far more regularly than technical issues or, dark and stormy nights. Yeah. So for me, the one of the most important parts of what I was doing was to be able to know what the non-technical skills were and to be good at them.
Some of our listeners mightn't know necessarily what CRM is. We'll expand it a little bit about crew resource management. And the idea, I suppose, the old days we always thought, what's the joke? What's the difference between God and the captain? God doesn't think he's a captain. Isn't that the famous line? Yeah, how do you actually work away that idea that you're still a leader, but people aren't afraid to talk to you or say they're not happy or something's not right?
Well, you've got to be approachable, and you set the tone when you meet your crew at the beginning of the flight. You've got to let them know that, hey, I'm here. We're all part of a team. Somebody has to be the leader, and today that just happens to be me. Bring your problems to me if you can't solve them yourself, but I'm not going to get in your way. I'll let you do your thing, and only come to me if there's something that you can't solve. I find that the best way to get the job done, especially with a large crew, is to just trust everybody, let them do their job, but verify that everything is being done properly, but don't get in their way. Leave them alone. You're dealing with a professional crew. They know what they're doing. They've done it lots of times before. And sometimes they did come to you with problems that they couldn't solve or problems that they had to come to you about, especially with troublesome passengers and so on, which inevitably happens. But for me, let everybody do their job and only get involved when you have to.
I'm curious about working in the Middle East because it's a very, very multicultural environment. Does that have its pros and its cons?
I never came across any real cons for it. The pros are you're constantly meeting new people from different backgrounds, sharing information. It is important that to fit into an environment like that you are the kind of person who can work in a multicultural environment, that you don't have any preconceived ideas. You're not one of those people who believes in cliches and nationalities and so on. And just approach it with a very open mind. when you go to do an interview for an airline that works in an environment like that, it is most certainly one of the areas they will probe you on to make sure that you're suitable and that you fit in an environment like that.
Let's go back and talk a little bit more about airplanes. We've only focused on one of the fleet. You talked about the 380, the 320, but there's a couple in the middle there that I'm curious about. The 340?
Yep, I flew two variants of the 340, the 300 and the 500. They're both great airplanes. The 300 gets a hard time because it was deemed to be, an underperformer and too slow. Well, wasn't really that slow. It would fly at the same Mach numbers as most long-range aircraft would fly at, but the engines were a little bit underpowered. But as I always say, once you get to 50 feet at the end of the runway, you don't care. You're climbing away and you're okay. But it was, of all the airplanes I've flown, including the 380, which is a wonderful machine, I think the 340-300 is probably my favorite. It's a real pilot's airplane. When you disconnect the automation, it just runs on rails. You put it where you want it to go, and it stays there. And it does exactly what you tell it when you tell it to do it. There are no vices. Very stable airplane. Loved it.
I love when you ask a pilot a question about an airplane and he starts with a smile. You smiled very much when you started to talk about that particular airplane. Okay, we've asked you about your first solo as a memorable flight. Any other memorable flights that you have other than the first solo?
Yeah, well, I'm always asked, and I mean, you even touched on it earlier on, and people say it all the time. So go on, tell me about the terrible time that something really horrible happened. And I have to be perfectly honest, it never really, I never had any issues with the airplane itself. It always behaved. If there were any days that I would look back on and think, yeah, that was an interesting day, or that was a more challenging day than I would have hoped, it's always been weather related. Because we fly at Emirates ultra long range flights, you can be taking off from 45 degrees in Dubai and flying into minus temperatures in somewhere like northern Canada, or you can be diverting into airports that you really would rather not have to go to. I did have an issue in North America. It can be quite challenging in the wintertime. The East Coast, flying into Toronto in wintertime, New York in wintertime, any busy environment when the weather is bad is you've got to be on your game on days like that. But you get through it. You look back and you learn, and you go and you share those lessons with your colleagues at your next CRM class.
You're back in Ireland and you're back on the radio.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Not to the same extent that I was before I left. I came back and I didn't want to do nothing. So I put out a few feelers, and I'm doing 2 days of the weekend, Saturday and Sunday afternoons, on Classic Hits Radio in Ireland, and it's good. I'm enjoying it again. I wanted to see if I could still do it. If very much had changed since I left. The answer to the first one, can I still do it? Well, yes, I can. And the answer to the other question has very much changed. Oh, yes, it really has. In terms of technology and studios and the way things are done. I mean, when you listen to it, it sounds the same, but the way it's put together and presented now is very different. So, but if you can get your head around the automation on a passenger jet, you can get your head around.
Then you can
the
probably
automation
manage the lecture fairly
studio.
well, exactly, when it comes to that one as well. What will you fly next, or have you decided to hang up the wings?
Yeah, great question. And I ask myself that regularly. I have a funny feeling that probably my flying days are over. I would like to get back into doing some teaching of CRM, because I really like that, and I was pretty good at that. But as far as flying another airplane again, I at the moment I don't know, but I suspect probably I'll hang my wings up and see if I can do something ground based.
Well, I've met a lot of pilots recently, professional pilots who are renewing their SEPs and heading back towards small airfields again. Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't rule that out in the future as well. I haven't had the the sort of the hankering to go and fly anything just yet. I'm too busy getting back on the radio and getting used to that. But maybe who knows? It's summer is starting now, and the weather will be good, and maybe I'll take a drive out to Weston and see what's going on.
Let me ask a philosophical question as we come to the end of our chat. If you could go back to 1984 and you've just parked Bravo Mike November back in Iona after your first solo, what bit of advice would you give that young fella? As
far as my aviation career is concerned, the advice I would give is keep going, don't stop. You know, as I said, I've no regrets at all about the way my aviation career has gone. It's been fantastic. Would I do it again? Absolutely, in a heartbeat. And it's great to be able to say that. Would I change anything about it? No, I don't think I would, really. I've flown with some incredible people, made some great friends, seen some... I mean, I've been around the world so many times at this stage. And that's one thing I do miss, traveling. That's probably what I will do. When things start to open up, I'll get back traveling again. But for advice for the 24-year-old me that was back there, no, I would say keep it going. It's worth every moment that you sweated and slaved over the books and all the preparation. So yeah, keep going.
Barry Lang, thanks for joining us on Long Final from Squawk 7000.
Thank you very much, Michael.